Good morning. As your vote counts, I'm Scott Mitchell with Senator Carri Hicks, Representative Brian Martinez. Good to have you both this morning. This week, I saw some disagreements between the governor, Superintendent Hofmeister, who's running for governor and likely his opponent in the upcoming, about getting some first volunteers in to schools and basically the management of how we've handled COVID. Who's doing the best job of leading on the issue of education, the governor or Superintendent Hofmeister?
I think what's really concerning about bringing additional folks into the classroom right now is those local decision leaders are making decisions to go virtual or to go remote, not only because there's a workforce issue, but because we've done a terrible job of handling the pandemic. Superintendent Woodward basically told us today that 70% of the students tested on site, and there were 20 kids an hour receiving testing, were positive for COVID-19. That to me says that we've not done a really good job of managing the pandemic so that students can be in the classroom.
Representative Martinez, put you on the spot. Who's doing the best job on managing this pandemic when it comes to education?
Yeah, hey, thanks a lot. To me, it's pretty simple. It's a simple answer because there's only one person actually managing the pandemic at all, and that's Kevin Stitt. It's easy to kind of sit back and throw bombs and say you would have done things differently, but never talk about what you would have actually done differently. And I would argue that Superintendent Hofmeister is really good at that right now. I'm good at saying, I don't like this, but not offering an alternative. I don't know if that alternative for her was to keep businesses closed longer, to keep kids at home and out of school. I don't know what that is. I would love to hear from her and hear what her specific plans would be. Not, hey, I'm not Kevin Stitt. That's not an answer. I think actually having a very specific plan, I think the people of Oklahoma probably deserve to know what that would be rather than just, this is wrong and complaining. That's one thing, but coming up with a solution is another.
Okay, and we know this is an election year. The legislature is about to start. I'm watching the bills come through with press releases. What do you see legislative this year dealing with education that's going to be worthy of praise and some worthy of scorn?
I think any legislation related to education right now needs to be lifting up those voices of educators in conjunction with parents. We know that parents really want to be seen and heard in the school process right now. And so I really think that it's important that we're looking at meaningful legislation that brings in collaboration so that there's not a divide and that we're working together to provide the best education possible to all students. We also know that certification is difficult. Any kind of legislation in maintaining the excellence and the quality and standard and also reducing barriers to those certifications is going to be incredibly important to maintain our workforce long term.
Representative Martinez, these bills are coming in hot and heavy, especially in the House. What's catching your eye?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So you've kind of alluded to the fact that a lot of the bills are being filed right now. The filing deadline just happened. So there is an overabundance of bills, and I'm kind of reading them as they come in the best that I can. One of the interesting things I always tell people, don't get too worked up at the first version of a bill because this is a process, right? A majority of these bills will never actually become law. Let's face it, there's usually about 3,000 of them filed, 3,000 bills, maybe 500 of those will become law, but also these things evolve. But I do want to say I agree with Senator Hicks. I think a lot of this legislation you'll see about education will deal with empowering parents and really having a conversation of how kids in Oklahoma are going to be educated for jobs in the future.
And that discussion is also going to deal with how the pandemic has been managed in Oklahoma. When we come back, who's doing the better job on that, and what bills could we see? Welcome back to Your Vote Counts. Not only was there a disagreement about education policy this week between Superintendent Hofmeister and the governor, there was a little spat about who's doing a better job of managing the pandemic. So I ask you, Representative Martinez, start this segment off. Who is doing a better job of managing the pandemic?
I'll tell you, it's interesting. It's an interesting time to be alive right now with this pandemic. I think that we're in a challenging time for every state. I do think that Kevin Stitt has done a good job leading us to this pandemic. There's no perfect answer. This is a pandemic. It's unprecedented. It's easy to be Joy Hofmeister and to throw bombs and to complain and say things aren't good enough and not offer any real solutions. So I hope that in the future, Joy Hofmeister will actually come out and be very specific about how she would have responded differently or what should happen instead, rather than just say, hey, this isn't good enough. And that would be my encouragement.
Senator Hicks, I mean, there's obviously a big difference. We're probably going to hear about it all during the session and all during the campaign, correct?
You know, I think any kind of allegation of saying that we've handled or that we've managed the pandemic is a falsehood. When you talk to any of our healthcare professionals, they're tired, they're worn out, they're stretched thin, resources are not there. We know that we had a dwindling workforce in the nursing arena before the pandemic began. And so when you're looking at whether or not we're managing a pandemic, I would say we're not. It's every person for themselves right now. And that's incredibly scary for a parent like me who has an immunocompromised child and is trying to make really informed and educated decisions for our family.
And likely we're going to be hearing about this at the legislature. There'll be bills introduced and discussed. Your thoughts about where we might be headed with this issue in the legislature?
So yeah, there is no doubt that there'll be plenty of bills on both sides of the issue, on every side of the issue. As we go on, I will tell you right now, I think what you'll see gain a lot of traction are bills that empower parents, business owners, people to really protect themselves and do what's best for their families. With the realization that the person that's the most qualified to say how your child is raised is you, the parent, not necessarily the government or anybody else. That truly trying to empower people to make educated and informed decisions.
Senator, your thoughts about where we might be headed with this topic at the legislature?
Well, it's no secret it's a public health crisis. And so I guess the question becomes whether or not, as a collective society, we believe in the public good. And so when we're looking at what those things that we fundamentally agree on to live among society, public health has to be at the top of that list. I do agree that people deserve to make those decisions for their families, but I think it needs to come from a place that is rooted in evidence, that is rooted in science, and that they are seeking advice of their medical professionals in this conversation. I hope my colleagues are doing that with their bills as well.
Well, it's going to be an interesting session, and there might be an election at the end of it. Who knows? See this again at news9.com/yourvotecounts. Thank you both for being here. Follow me on Twitter at Mitchell Talks. We'll see you next week.